What if I told you that every major household debt crisis in recorded history followed the exact same sequence? Not similar patterns, not vague parallels. I'm talking about an exact mathematical progression, stage by stage, like clockwork. The 2008 subprime collapse followed it. The 1929 margin debt crisis followed it. The 2001 Argentina default followed it. And right now, the American consumer is following it again. But here's the part that should terrify you. We aren't heading toward a crisis. We are already in one. As of today, American credit card debt has hit a record $1.23 trillion. That is a 60% increase in just 4 years. It's the same hockey stick growth pattern we saw from 2004 to 2008. Delinquency rates have now hit 12.3%, matching the worst levels of the Great Recession. But here's the kicker. Back in 2008, unemployment was 10%. Today, it's only 4%. Think about that for a moment. If the system is cracking this badly when the economy is supposedly strong, what happens when it actually breaks? This isn't a theory. According to the data, we have just crossed into the final stage of a 4-stage death spiral. And the window before the final collapse is much shorter than you think. The default wave starts in exactly 90 days. Not years, not months with an S, 90 days. This isn't a prediction. It is a mathematical certainty based on bank charge-off cycles. The delinquencies that spiked in mid-2024 are mathematically scheduled to become defaults in early 2025. The clock is already ticking, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Right now, 46% of Americans are carrying credit card balances month to month. 1 in 5 is completely maxed out, and a record 10.75% are making only minimum payments. If you are in that group making minimum payments, you are already in the interest trap. There are only 3 ways out, and none of them are pleasant. You might be thinking this sounds alarmist, but the numbers I'm about to show you come directly from the Federal Reserve and the St. Louis Fed. The mathematics are inexorable. Back in early 2007, people thought the economy was doing fine too. Stocks were up. Unemployment was low. But the math had already turned. The difference today is that you have the chance to see the pattern before it completes. Let me show you the mechanism, because once you understand this 4-stage sequence, you will see it everywhere. The sequence always begins the same way, in what I call Stage 1, easy money. This is when a society makes credit cheap and available far beyond anyone's ability to repay it. It happened in the 1920s, when we invented installment buying for radios and cars. It happened in the 2000s, with no-doc mortgage loans. And it happened again from 2010 to 2021. For over a decade, the Federal Reserve held interest rates at essentially zero. They pumped $4.5 trillion into the system through quantitative easing. Credit card offers with 0% interest flooded our mailboxes. Buy now, pay later services like Affirm and Klarna exploded. The message was clear. Borrow today, worry later. And we listened. In the first quarter of 2021, credit card debt stood at $770 billion. By the third quarter of 2025, it had exploded to $1.23 trillion. That is the fastest debt expansion since the lead-up to 2008. According to Federal Reserve data, between 2010 and 2021, total U.S. debt grew by 89%. But during that same period, our GDP grew by just 42%. We were creating money at twice the rate we were creating actual economic value. But here is what makes Stage 1 so seductive. It works for a while. It feels like prosperity. It feels like progress. You could suddenly afford the vacation, the upgrade, the renovation. But what was actually happening was a massive borrowing from your future self. And inevitably, the future arrives. That brings us to Stage 2, debt saturation. This is the moment when American families collectively hit the wall. This is when adding more debt no longer stimulates growth. Think about it from your own life. If you have no debt and someone offers you a loan, you might start a business or buy a home. That loan creates economic activity. That is productive debt. But if you already owe $30,000 and someone offers you another $10,000, what do? You don't start a business. You use that new debt just to make minimum payments on your old debt. You are borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. There is no new growth, just a bigger hole. We have now reached that saturation point nationally. Today, 20% of all cardholders are completely maxed out. They have hit their limits and cannot borrow another dollar. Even worse, 10.75% of borrowers are making only minimum payments. That is the highest rate ever recorded since the Fed started tracking this data in 2012. Let me explain why that is a trap. If you have $10,000 in debt at a 22% interest rate and you pay a $200 minimum payment, $183 of that is pure interest. You are paying $2,200 a year to the bank, and your principal barely moves. Why is this happening now? Because inflation has eaten 45% of wage gains since 2021. Rent is up, groceries are up, gas is up. So people started putting groceries on the card, then gas on the card, then utilities. The balance went from $10,000 to $12,000 to $15,000. And now they are trapped. A recent bank rate survey found that 33% of Americans now have more credit card debt than emergency savings. 1/3 of the country has zero financial cushion. This is the definition of debt saturation. The system is full, and when a saturated system takes on one more drop of pressure, it breaks. And that spiral has a name. Stage 3. Delinquency eruption. This is the moment when struggling becomes breaking. This is when people stop juggling payments and start missing them altogether. This is the point of no return in the pattern. According to the Federal Reserve, the share of users who are 90+ days behind on payments has nearly doubled since 2021. As of the first quarter of 2025, over 1 in 8 accounts is seriously delinquent. That is 12.3%. And let's be clear what seriously delinquent means. It doesn't mean a few days late. It means they haven't paid a dime in 3 months. It means they probably never will. The St. Louis Fed released a report in May 2025 titled "The Broad, Continuing Rise in Delinquent U.S. Credit Card Debt." Their conclusion was terrifying. Current delinquency levels now match or exceed the worst moments of the 2008 crisis. Let me repeat that because it is the most important number in this entire video. In 2008, the entire financial system was collapsing. Banks were failing. Unemployment was 10%, and delinquencies peaked around 6.7%. Today, we are told the economy is strong. Unemployment is only 4%, yet delinquencies are at 12.3%. They are nearly double what they were during the Great Financial Crisis. If this many people can't pay their bills in a good economy, what happens when a recession actually starts? What happens when unemployment goes from 4% to 6%? This isn't just happening to subprime borrowers. Delinquencies are rising across all income groups and all geographic regions. Even high-income households have seen an 80% jump in delinquencies since 2021. In poorer zip codes, 20% of all credit card debt is now delinquent. 1 in every $5 lent out in those areas will never be repaid. The banks know what is coming. Major issuers like Discover and Capital One have dramatically increased their loan loss reserves. They are setting aside billions of dollars because they can see the tsunami on the horizon. The net charge-off rate has jumped from 1.5% in 2021 to a projected 5% in 2025. This is the smoking gun. This is the mathematical point where stage 3 becomes inevitable stage 4. And stage 4 is the default wave itself. The progression is simple. Delinquency leads to default. Default leads to bankruptcy. And widespread bankruptcy leads to systemic crisis. Banks officially charge off debt after 180 days of non-payment. With delinquencies spiking throughout 2024, that 180-day clock is running out right now. We are looking at over $120 billion in debt going bad simultaneously. This isn't a gradual slide. It is a concentrated wave. And when it hits, the system doesn't absorb it quietly. It reacts violently. Credit contracts immediately. Banks tighten standards across the board. Even healthy borrowers get their limits cut and applications denied. We have seen this before. But to understand exactly what comes next, you don't need a crystal ball. You just need to look at the history books. Let me show you something that will make your blood run cold. I am going to overlay 2 data sets, one from the lead up to the 2008 financial crisis, and one from the period we are living through right now. And you tell me if you can spot the difference. In the 4 years leading up to late 2008, total household debt followed a specific hockey stick trajectory. It started at roughly $700 billion and peaked at $866 billion. That was a total growth of about 45% in 4 years. Economists called it a warning sign of a system spiraling out of control. Now look at our current era. In the first quarter of 2021, we started at $770 billion. By the third quarter of 2025, we hit $1.23 trillion. That is a growth rate of 60% in just 4 years. The pattern isn't just similar. It is accelerating faster than the run-up to the Great Recession. We are climbing the same hockey stick, but the slope is steeper. The parallel goes deeper than just the total amount of debt. Look at Federal Reserve policy in both periods. In 2006, the Fed began aggressively raising interest rates to cool down an overheating economy. But they were hiking into a system already leveraged to the hilt. Adjustable rate mortgages reset, monthly payments doubled, and defaults cascaded. Now look at 2022 through 2024. The Federal Reserve raised rates at the fastest pace in 40 years. They took the base rate from near zero to over 5%. Credit card APRs followed instantly, exploding from 14% to over 22% today. That is the highest average rate since the Fed started tracking this data in 1994. Just like in 2007, the central bank hiked rates into a debt-saturated economy. And just like in 2007, the result has been a mathematical disaster for the average consumer. The most disturbing parallel, however, is the public denial. In 2007, Ben Bernanke famously told Congress the subprime crisis was contained. He said it wouldn't affect the broader economy. By September 2008, Lehman Brothers had collapsed. In 2023 and 2024, we heard the exact same assurances. We were told inflation was transitory. We were told the economy was strong and resilient. Yet here we are in 2025, with delinquencies smashing through critical thresholds. Authorities always say the problem is contained. They are always wrong at the inflection points. The reassurance itself is historically a warning sign. Think back to your own experience in 2020 and 2021. Didn't it feel like everyone was getting rich? Stimulus checks arrived, people bought new cars, and neighbors day-traded stocks from their couches. The economy felt like it was booming. But that wasn't genuine prosperity. It was a symptom of the transition from stage 1 to stage 2. It was money creation outpacing value creation. It was the exact same illusion of wealth we saw in 2005, when everyone was a real estate genius. That intoxicating sense of easy money is not a sign of health. It is the fever before the sickness. And now, the fever has broken. Here is the one major difference between 2008 and today. And this is the fact that should terrify you. In 2008, when delinquency rates peaked at 6.7%, the economy was in free fall. Unemployment had spiked to 10%. Banks were failing. Today, we are told unemployment is only 4%. The stock market is hitting new highs. By all traditional metrics, this is a strong economy. Yet, the delinquency rate is 12.3%. It is nearly double the peak of the 2008 crisis. And that is happening while people still have jobs. According to St. Louis Fed data, more people are delinquent right now than during the absolute worst moments of the Great Recession. We aren't approaching 2008 levels. We are already far past them. Let that sink in for a moment. If American families are this distressed in a good economy, what happens when the economy actually turns? What happens when unemployment climbs from 4% to 6% or 8%? If the dam is breaking in fair weather, a storm will wash the valley away. The default wave isn't a possibility. It is a tsunami that has already formed. To understand why this is inevitable, we need to stop looking at trillions and start looking at the kitchen table. Let me show you exactly how the interest trap works. Imagine a typical family of 4 living in a mid-sized American city. They earn a combined income of $75,000 a year. They are solid middle class. In early 2021, they had about $5,000 in credit card debt. It was manageable. Then came 2022. Inflation exploded. Grocery bills went from $600 to $900 a month. Rent increased 20%. Wage gains were erased by inflation. So they faced a choice: cut essentials or use the credit card. They put the groceries on the card, then gas, then a $1,200 car repair. The balance crept up from $5,000 to $15,000. And while the balance grew, interest rates rose. Now, look at the mathematics of their situation today. They owe $15,000 at 22% APR. The minimum payment is roughly $300 a month. But of that $300, about $275 is pure interest. They are paying $3,300 a year just to service the debt. That is money that can't go to savings, retirement, or food. They are running on a treadmill that is moving faster than they can run. Maybe they try to pay extra in a good month, but then life happens. A sick child, new tires, and the balance creeps back up. Eventually, they can only afford the minimum. And once you are paying minimums on a 22% loan, you are mathematically trapped. The principal barely moves. The interest compounds. You are effectively renting your own previous lifestyle at an exorbitant rate. Think about the emotional weight of that. A recent Guardian article quoted a borrower saying, "It just starts to kind of snowball on you. It's a constant weight in the back of my mind." That weight is what 46% of American households are carrying right now. It is the anxiety of being one emergency away from disaster. And the worst part is, there are only 3 ways out. Option 1, you pay it down. You generate massive extra income to attack the principal. But in today's economy, that is nearly impossible for most. Option 2, you default. You stop paying, destroy your credit score for a decade, and face collection agencies. Option 3, you declare bankruptcy. A fresh start, but at an enormous cost to your future stability. Those are the only options. There is no magic 4th choice. The mathematics allow for no other paths. Multiply that single family by 60 million households. That is roughly the number of American families carrying balances. With $1.23 trillion in total debt at 21% interest, Americans are paying approximately $258 billion a year just in interest. That is $250 billion siphoned from the productive economy. Bankrate's 2025 survey found that 33% of Americans have more credit card debt than emergency savings. 1/3 of the country is living with negative net liquidity. 1 flat tire, 1 urgent care visit. That is all it takes to push them from struggling to defaulting. The fuse has already been lit. But credit cards are just one part of the story. The dam is breaking from multiple points simultaneously. Let's talk about auto loans. For most Americans, a car is not a luxury. It is a necessity. It is the only way to get to work. People will pay their car note before almost anything else. And yet, Americans are losing their cars at a shocking rate. In late 2024, auto loan delinquencies hit 3.0%. The highest level since 2010. But delinquency is just the warning. Repossession is the result. In the first 9 months of 2025 alone, 2.2 million vehicles were repossessed. Projections suggest we will hit 3 million by year-end. That would exceed the worst year of the Great Recession. We are seeing the worst auto loan losses in modern history. That is 3 million people waking up to find their driveway empty. 3 million people who can no longer get to their jobs. Auction lots across the country are overflowing with repossessed vehicles. Repo companies are running 24-hour operations and still can't keep up. And Newsweek found something disturbing. Many of the people defaulting are prime borrowers. People with high credit scores and no prior history of default. People who did everything right until systemic pressure overwhelmed them. Then there is the time bomb that just detonated. Student loans. If credit cards are the burning fuse, student loans are the explosion. For 3 years during the pandemic, payments were paused. People built budgets assuming that bill didn't exist. In September 2023, payments restarted. The result was immediate carnage. At the end of 2024, delinquency was technically near zero. By the 3rd quarter of 2025, just months after the full restart, it exploded. Recent data shows 14.3% of borrowers are now 90-plus days delinquent. We went from 0.8% to 14.3% in 3 quarters. That isn't a trend, it is a vertical spike. The American Enterprise Institute estimates 5.5 million borrowers are now in default. Another 3.7 million are severely delinquent. That is nearly 10 million Americans whose financial lives have been capsized in less than a year. And remember, you can almost never discharge student loans in bankruptcy. The government can garnish wages and seize tax refunds. This is a financial scarlet letter for an entire generation. Finally, look at the safety net. The personal savings rate has collapsed. After a brief stimulus spike in 2020, the savings rate cratered in 2024. Americans are saving almost nothing now. Remember, 1/3 of the country has zero financial cushion. They are living on the edge of a razor. Add it all up. Total household debt has hit a record $18.6 trillion. Credit cards are failing at rates double the 2008 crisis. Auto loans are failing at 2010 levels. Student loans have exploded into default. Savings are gone. Ohio State economist Lucia Dunn warned that any policy intervention now might just be kicking the can down the road. But the road has run out. There are only 3 ways this resolves. The debt gets paid. Unlikely. It gets inflated away. destroying purchasing power, or it gets defaulted on, crashing the system. There is no fourth option. The dam is breaking. It is not a question of if the collapse happens. It is a question of when the wave fully hits. So when does the wave actually hit? Let me show you the timeline. You are probably asking yourself a very logical question right now. Why 90 days? Why not 6 months, or a year, or never? Why am I so certain about this specific timeline? Let me show you the cold arithmetic. This isn't a prediction based on feelings. It is based on banking regulations and the calendar. In the banking world, there is a hard rule regarding credit card debt. Banks officially charge off debt after 180 days of non-payment. That is the standard. 6 months from the first missed payment to the official default. So, look at the timeline of delinquencies. We saw delinquencies begin to spike aggressively in the second and third quarters of 2024. Do the math. 6 months from mid-2024 lands us exactly in late 2024 and early 2025. We are approaching the mathematical convergence point right now. The wave of people who stopped paying 6 months ago is about to crash onto bank balance sheets as official losses. But there is a reason you haven't seen the panic on the news yet. Federal Reserve data lags by 1 quarter. The worst charge-off numbers won't be publicly visible until the Q1 and Q2 reports of 2025 are released. But the defaults are happening in real time, right now. We are driving looking in the rearview mirror, but the cliff is directly in front of the windshield. There is another factor masking the crisis. The holiday spending cliff. November and December always mask financial distress. People spend on credit for the holidays. They take advantage of year-end sales. Retailers report decent numbers, and the economy looks okay on the surface. It is a sugar high, not health. But come January and February, the holiday bills arrive. The sales end. And historically, companies begin their layoffs in the first quarter to balance their books. Consumers who were barely hanging on suddenly find they can't make the minimums on the debt they racked up in December. This is a pattern we have seen before. Recessions and credit events often reveal themselves in the first quarter, once the holiday mirage fades. In 2008, the recession became undeniable in the first quarter. The pattern repeats, and history confirms this timeline. The World Gold Council studied 47 major currency and debt crises since 1900. They found a consistent pattern. Once serious delinquencies spike above critical thresholds, a full-blown crisis follows within 18 to 36 months on average. We crossed those critical thresholds in late 2023 and early 2024. But when delinquencies reach the specific levels we saw in 2008, the timeline accelerates. The default wave typically hits within 6 to 9 months. We hit those 2008 levels in the middle of 2024. Add 6 to 9 months, and you arrive at the first quarter of 2025. We are in the window right now. When I say 90 days, I am not being dramatic. I am simply reading the calendar. The charge-off cycle, the holiday cliff, and the historical precedent all converge on the same point in time. We are counting down to the moment when the crisis becomes undeniable. Which brings us to the most important question of all. What happens when the wave hits? History shows us there are only 3 mathematical ways out of a debt bubble this size. I need you to understand that these aren't policy suggestions. They are the only possibilities when the arithmetic breaks down. Think of them as 3 doors. And we have to walk through one of them, whether we want to or not. Door number 1. Mass default and bankruptcy. This is the deflationary crash. Millions of Americans default on their debts. They declare Chapter 7 or Chapter 13 bankruptcy. The financial system has to absorb massive losses. This is essentially what happened in 2008. Banks wrote off hundreds of billions in bad mortgages. Based on current delinquency rates, we are looking at potentially 5 to 10 million Americans entering default or bankruptcy by 2026. That is not speculation. That is the math, based on 12.3% of accounts being delinquent. If we go through this door, the consequences are severe. For the individual, it means a destroyed credit score for 7 to 10 years. It means you can't get a loan, you can't rent an apartment, and your financial life is put on hold for a decade. For the economy, it means a credit crunch. Banks stop lending. Small businesses fail. A deep recession follows. Door number 2. Inflation and currency debasement. This is where the government tries to print its way out of the trap. To prevent mass bankruptcies, the Fed lowers rates and restarts the money printer. They might issue stimulus checks or enact debt forgiveness programs. This makes the nominal debts easier to pay because wages and asset prices rise in dollar terms. But your purchasing power gets destroyed. We already saw a preview of this from 2021 to 2023, when inflation hit 9%. It erased years of savings for millions of families. If they choose this door again, we could see persistent 5 to 7% inflation for years. Or worse, a 1970s-style stagflation scenario. Under this scenario, the financial system is preserved, but savers and retirees are impoverished. Your 401k might still save $500,000, but it will only buy what $300,000 used to buy. This door saves the banks, but it destroys the middle class. Door number 3, policy intervention and restructuring. This is the chaotic middle ground. We are already seeing proposals for this. In late 2024, there was a bipartisan bill to cap credit card interest rates at 10%. Imagine that. Overnight, banks would be forced to cut rates from 22% to 10%. Consumers would cheer, but banks would lose billions. We could see student loan jubilees, rent freezes, or forced mortgage modifications. This door is politically volatile. It picks winners and losers based on political pressure. It creates systemic chaos and unpredictable cascading effects. Here is the reality. In practice, we will probably walk through a combination of all 3 doors. We will see a wave of defaults. We will see inflation as the Fed tries to cushion the blow, and we will see desperate government interventions. It will be a messy, painful, prolonged reset. The status quo is the only thing that is mathematically impossible. Something has to break. The only question is, what breaks first and how hard? So how do you position yourself? To answer that, let's look at the survivors of the last 2 major resets, the Great Depression of 1929 and the financial crisis of 2008. What survived? And what got destroyed? In 2008, the casualties were obvious. The S&P 500 lost 57% of its value. Corporate bonds defaulted. Banks failed. Real estate prices collapsed by 30% or more. The average 401k lost nearly 40% of its value. But look at the survivors. U.S. Treasury bonds held their value as people fled to safety. Gold maintained its purchasing power and rose modestly. Defensive stocks like utilities and consumer staples held up better than the broader market. Tangible assets survived. Paper promises were crushed. Go back even further to 1929. The stock market lost 89% of its value. Thousands of banks collapsed, taking people's life savings with them. But gold, agricultural land, and commodities retained their real value. An ounce of gold in 1933 could buy roughly the same amount of goods as it could in 1929, even as the dollar was devalued. The lesson is consistent. Productive assets and hard assets survive when the credit cycle breaks. Debt-based assets and speculative bubbles get destroyed. This brings us to the most dangerous part of our current situation. Most middle-class Americans have their wealth in exactly the wrong places for a reset. According to Federal Reserve data, the wealthiest 10% of Americans own 89% of the stock market. They are diversified. They hold real estate, private equity, art, and gold. But for the average middle-class family, their primary wealth is in 2 things: their home equity and their retirement account. Both of those are dollar-denominated assets. Both are vulnerable. If we go through door number 1, the stock market tanks, and the 401k gets crushed. If we go through door number 2, inflation eats the real value of that retirement account alive. Traditional middle-class wealth storage is at risk no matter which door we choose, but the smart money is already moving. Have you noticed what gold has been doing? From 2019 to late 2024, gold prices are up 44%. It is currently trading over $2,600 an ounce. While the media was talking about the strong economy, sophisticated investors were quietly moving into hard assets. Look at Bitcoin. Despite its volatility, it went from $3,800 in March 2020 to over $60,000 in 2024. These aren't random price movements. They are the canaries in the coal mine. They signal a flight to non-dollar stores of value, assets that cannot be inflated away. assets that cannot be defaulted on. The smart money doesn't wait for the headlines. They position themselves before the crisis becomes obvious. I am not a financial advisor, and I cannot tell you what to do with your money. But I can tell you what the framework for survival looks like. Priority number 1 is to reduce your exposure to the interest trap. If you have high-interest credit card debt, paying it down is the best guaranteed return you will ever get. Priority number 2 is liquidity. Building an emergency fund, even if it is just $1,000, puts you ahead of 1/3 of the country. Priority number 3 is understanding asset classes. Do not assume your 401k is safe just because it is a long-term investment. In 2008, long-term investors lost half their portfolio in 6 months. Understand the difference between paper assets and real assets. But the most important preparation isn't financial. It is knowledge. It is awareness. Let me bring this full circle. We have documented a 4-stage pattern that has preceded every major debt crisis. Stage 1, easy money. We saw the $1.23 trillion debt explosion. Check. Stage 2, debt saturation. We see 46% of people carrying balances. Check. Stage 3, delinquency eruption. We see delinquency rates higher than 2008. Check. Stage 4, the default wave. It is approaching now, inside a 90-day window. This is not a theory. It is a documented historical fact found in the ledgers of the Federal Reserve. Every data point confirms we are in the late stages of a debt supercycle. But unlike previous generations, you have an advantage. In 1929, the crash was a shock. In 2008, most people didn't understand what was happening until their accounts were down 40%. You are different. You have seen the pattern. You know the stages. You understand the timeline. You have the advantage of seeing the sequence before it completes. The question is not whether the pattern will complete. History is 5 for 5. It has a 100% completion rate. The question is whether you will use this knowledge to position yourself for what is coming. We are not entering a crisis. We are already in one. We are just in the quiet phase, the eye of the storm. Most people haven't realized it yet because the official charge-offs haven't hit the headlines. But that phase does not last long. The window between stage 3 and stage 4 is measured in months, not years. Once stage 4 begins, once the headlines scream crisis, repositioning becomes much harder. That is when everyone rushes for the same exit simultaneously. This is your moment of decision, not tomorrow, not next month. Now, you can't stop the pattern from unfolding, but you can prepare for it. The people who survived 2008 were the ones who saw it coming and positioned accordingly. The casualties were the ones who assumed everything would be fine. Denial won't stop the mathematics. Only preparation can. The next 90 days will determine whether you are in a lifeboat or in the water when the ship goes down. Remember the numbers. 46% of Americans carrying balances. 12.3% already defaulting. 3 million cars repossessed. $18.6 trillion in household debt. The default wave isn't coming. It is already here. The only question is, will you be ready when it becomes undeniable? The pattern doesn't wait for anyone. It just unfolds, stage by stage, exactly as it has 5 times before.